Hello, everyone. When it comes to Proxima Midnight, I do not recommend her as a baseline. However, if you are a discard player, she's fantastic, and a traditional discard player, she's fantastic. I would add her. Her issues in terms is she is reliant on discard being good, and the main or the most popular discard deck, Hella Discard, doesn't use her well. So if you are just trying to play strong Hella Discard decks, she isn't something to recommend. However, if you are trying to play or discard main that plays lots of different discards, especially traditional discard, she's a fantastic use case. But for a general case, don't recommend. And her spotlight isn't super premium either. So we'll get into the details. Let's get started. How you doing? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Educated Call Snap channel. We are going to be talking about Proxima Midnight today. She's really good in traditional discard, however struggles a little bit with Hella, but we're getting to the ins and outs, the details on whether I recommend her and some of the deck builds that people have been playing with her. So should be a fun one. Let's get started. Alright, so we have Proxima Midnight. She's a 4 energy 7 power card. If you discard this card, it jumps to your lowest power location that is not full. So essentially this is a full discard card. If you don't have discard synergy, you can still play this as a 4/7, but 4/7 isn't really a premium stat line in this game and that gets played. So you're really only playing this as a discard synergy card. So that in mind, it is pretty good. Similar to kind of Wolverine, similar to Swarm. Those are like the two similarities. This, I would say it's most similar to Swarm in that it's discards and then you get its power down for free. Though Swarm, you get to control it, and Swarm is also 2 pieces. However, Swarm's base power is 6 power, where this is 7 power. So there is a particular upside. You don't control where it jumps, it's just the lowest power location. However, I do actually think that is not as big of a downside since you know where it's going down, comparative to like Wolverine, where it's not the lowest power location. You don't know where Wolverine's gonna go, even though it's 4 power in particular. So pretty good in particular discard decks. However, there are some downsides to mention. Right, it is only 7 power, so if you are trying to play a Hella deck, it's comparatively lower power than something Hella likes to revive, which usually that's going to be like 10 plus power. So in those decks, it's not really cool. And then it is kind of restricted to the discard archetype. You can't really play this in like a Zabu deck or anything like that, right? So it does have some of those downsides to keep in mind, but yeah, it's still pretty good in the decks that can play this. So when it comes to recommended discard, obviously this is going to be whether you like playing traditional discard or not. In essence, for most people, I would say that you don't have to spend with this card. Corvus, I did recommend this one. I'm going to say I'm going to lean on the don't recommend. Now, the reason why this is not as recommended as something like Corvus. Corvus just has way more flexibility in where you can play the card. And if you are a discard fan, you probably already have this card. You probably already tested it. You're probably already like, oh yeah, this card is good in my discard deck. Yeah, it's going to be good in discard. However, it has a much narrower window where this is going to see general play. So if you are playing traditional discard, you do like that, it's going to feel good. Now, the something to keep in mind is I don't know if this like version of discard is better than old Chavez discard, like before they nerfed American Chavez. That version of discard, I feel like would still be more consistent than this version of traditional discard we have, which is a little bit sad that it hasn't recovered, in my opinion, from that Chavez nerf. That consistency of just getting Chavez into Apocalypse, into Dracula, just all that working perfectly together, and then the swarms at the end. Like, I feel like that was like very refined, and we've all been trying to scramble to find a discard that was like as good as that. And I don't know if this is better. It is good. It's playable for sure, but I don't know if it like this is just a no something I've noticed. It's not really super relevant to Proxima Midnight. In essence, it's just something like we're all trying to create that old discard deck, and everything like reminds me of her essentially. So kind of interesting. Now another issue I have with recommending this card is that you have to compare this card to current Hela decks. Hela is super popular. Black Knight Hela is super popular, and I don't think Proxima like makes that deck better. Just because its power isn't high enough to play generically, and when you are playing these Hela decks, Black Knight Hela, like you don't really want a 4/7. You kind of want like a 6/10, a 6/11, that kind of thing. So I wouldn't say that she fits into that particular archetype super well, and that's the most common discard deck in the game right now. It's a Hela version of discard. So the most common deck you don't really want to play her in. That's like to me a big downside of recommending this card, right? Like you have to build a different deck than the most popular discard deck to play her. Yeah. Another thing, right, is that discard has to be good, right? Like if traditional discards can getting a lot of cards for the archetype, right? So it is getting better over time, right? We got Meek, we got Corvus, we're getting this now, right? These are a lot of pieces to get a good deck. But if this card isn't good, same like with Move, right? Move gets pieces, but the problem is like Move isn't a good archetype to play. So no matter how good the pieces are, Move doesn't move the needle on how good Move is. Sorry. Same thing here. It's how good is this card, right? Like I don't think it's as good as traditional like old Chavez discard. I also don't think it's as good as Hela discard. So it's hard to say, oh, get this card when the decks I'm recommending I don't really think are like the strongest versions of the decks you can create. So that's kind of some of the issues. I think this is a great card if you're playing discard. Like this is one of the best discard pieces we've gotten in a long time. However, is that enough to make discard a top tier? I mean, discard is a top tier, but is it better than Hela discard is my question, right? And I struggle to see them beating Hela discard consistently. Now you can just play this in Hela discard and that's perfectly fine, but the way Hela discard works, right? Like discarding a card is the same as playing it. So discarding Proxima Midnight isn't like beneficial because it just means like your Hela is doing less than it normally would be. So that's an issue. And then the last thing is it's not a core card. This is basically like a better Wolverine. It's basically like a somewhat better Swarm. Like Swarm has its own upside, so I'm not gonna say it's like a better Swarm, but it is strictly speaking on a base power level a better Swarm, better Wolverine. But you could just be playing Wolverine. You could just be playing Swarm. Now there's an argument that you could make a deck that's all of those cards, right? Like you're playing MODOK and you're playing Proxima, Swarm, Wolverine, all the discard pieces. Then you have a huge Morbius. You have a huge Meek. That kind of thing, like that's definitely cool, but except for those particular archetypes or those specific decks where you're playing all of those pieces, this is just a card that could be replaced with Swarm, could be replaced with Wolverine, and you just have to see like, is that better, like, or is that worse, right? So those are some of the limiting factors for this card. However, if you are just a discard player, you mostly play discard decks, you probably already have the card, and this is a good card. Like, this is a fantastic card if you're a discard piece. But for general players, they're just looking, is this a card that I need to get? I would say Corvus is more of a recommendation than Proxima in a base value. So those are my thoughts on the card and whether you should buy it or not. Now, let's look at some of the other things like the spotlights and whatnot. So, unlike Corvus Glaive, Proxima Spotlight, I just don't think is as good. It's just not as powerful as Corvus is. Corvus had 3 Series 5 premium cards that you want in your collection. Proxima is a Series 5 herself, so she's good to have. But MODOK, a lot of people already have, and then Dakin, once again, is also a Series 4 that people do have. So you are comparing, do you want to spend your keys on Proxima? It's hard to recommend. Now, if you're missing all of the cards, then sure, right? If you're missing MODOK and Dakin, then sure. If you're missing MODOK, I would say MODOK is a core card to have. If you don't have MODOK, it's something you want to have in your collection, just because it opens up most of the discard decks. Some decks nowadays are running Corvus, so you can kind of get away with not having MODOK a little bit now, but it's still been a core card and very important in a lot of discard decks for quite a long time. So I would still lean to getting this card if you don't have MODOK as well. So if you don't have MODOK and you want Proxima, sure, I would say that's okay. Not super clean because you could just get MODOK with 3,000 tokens, so it's not like super core, but it is something to do. However, if you already have MODOK, if you already have Dakin, I wouldn't say like open up the keys just for Proxima. Like that's a hard ask in my opinion. If you're spending like 3-4 keys for just Proxima, like I just don't really see if like I don't think that's worth versus like saving up and like getting some of the cards that are coming out in the next couple months. So that's my thoughts in terms of spotlights. Just hard to recommend there. And then as always, we have the deck lists, right? So here are some of them. The first one we do have is just a traditional discard deck. It's a little bit more fancy because you're running Hellcarrier and you're running Collector. So Collector, I would say, is just kind of easy to get quite big. It triggers with Apocalypse, it triggers with Helicarrier, it triggers with Swarm. So there's quite a bit of ways to get this to be like a 2/6, 2/7, depending on how lucky you are with your MODOK. Like this could be really big, but still generally pretty good to pick up if you are running a traditional discard deck. And then you get to keep your Corvus, you get to keep your Proxima. This is essentially the deck I would have made. It's funny enough, like this is essentially the deck I would have made if I were making a discard deck, a traditional discard deck, taking advantage of the Helicarrier. I think Helicarrier lets the Corvus feel reasonable because one of the issues with traditional discard with Corvus is that there's no use of the extra mana. But with Helicarrier getting a ton of cards, and some of them will be like cheap cards that you can play or cards that just make sense, or even more discards, right? Like that's something that's possible. So I definitely like this version of the deck. Is something I do think makes sense in terms of a deck design aspect. So that's the obvious, I think, Proxima type deck to be made. Second of all, you can just put her in Hela. Now, I did kind of spend like 2-3 minutes talking about why I would rather you have a better card or a bigger card, not a better card, but a bigger card. But it just opens up not needing to play Hela or have Hela be the trigger if some of your discards do give you value, right? So here you have the Swarm, here you have Proxima. So it's not necessarily, oh, you have to play Hela. You also have Apocalypse. So it's kind of a traditional discard, but you're using some of the other pieces to make work. So that is something to keep in mind there. So still works, but it's more of a adaptation and Hela being a supplemental piece instead of traditionally being the win game or the end game piece. But it's still, in my opinion, it's still mostly a Hela deck. You're going to feel the best when Hela comes out, but you have other ways of winning with Swarm, with Proxima, with Apocalypse that makes sense. Next up, we have an adaptation. So this is kind of similar. I think Regis was the one that created Moon Girl Proxima deck. So the strategy of this deck is you copy Proxima. Then when you discard it with MODOK, you're discarding and you're getting 14 power off of the MODOK. So MODOK becomes a 522, right? With upside because it triggers your Modus, your Swarm, your Apocalypse, it triggers everything as well, right? But essentially you're getting double the value of the Proxima. And that's pretty good with the 7 baseline into 14. Like that's a very powerful effect. Now, I would say the traditional or the version that's popular isn't very good. Like its win rate is very bad, right? So I just think some adjustments could be made. We're running Apocalypse, things like that. So we're just adjusting a little bit to take advantage of the ability, right? Having Zabu in there to go. Zabu, Dracula into Moon Girl on 4 with Dracula already down, I think is a lot easier to get the value off, things like that. And then you could just play Proxima as a 3/7. That's not bad. It's not amazing, but it's not bad for sure. So there's definitely some upside to that. So I just think this is a little bit safer version of the version that's out there, and it's a cool idea. So I definitely wanted to shout it out for sure. And then last we have just Wong with discard. It's something that can always be done. It's just not that super popular since Wong is just risky in essence, but there's just a lot of ways to take advantage of the Wong. You could make huge stack-ins. You could take advantage of the Hell Carrier with the discards. You could go like Wong into Modok, and then Modok discards the Helicarrier and then discards all of the cards in the Helicarrier. Make your Morbius insane, triggering some of all your other cards. So there's just a lot of value there to be had here with this Wong Modok combo with all the other synergies you have there, as well as Silver Samurai, things like that. So I think this was a cool take on using Wong and discard deck with Proxima to be pretty cool. So if you like this kind of combo card, kind of essence, you have a lot of options here, but it's still kind of the main issue of Proxima. You are having to play a discard deck in some essence when you run this card. There's not a lot of like variability. You can see like Corvus, people are playing Corvus and Ramp, people are playing Corvus and Hela, people are just playing Corvus just as a discard too. You could kind of do that as well. So definitely some cool things. It's a strong card in its archetype. Now my question is like, is that good enough to spend the keys on, right? So depending on whether you are a big discard fan or not, I think this is really going to depend on whether you get this card. But if you do like it, feels good. In terms of, people always asked, should you spend tokens on her? Token value, once again, depends whether you are discard. I would lean tokens over keys in essence for this card, but if you want to spend tokens on her, are you going to be playing traditional discard primarily as like your main deck? If that is true, then yeah, get her for sure. She's an upgrade, so that is the key. But if you aren't going to be using, or if you're the type of player that swaps decks a lot, like doesn't have like a main deck, that I would say save your keys, save your tokens for something that has a little bit more flexibility, things like that. So that's my thoughts on her. Hope it makes sense. Hope you guys enjoy it. We have a lot of videos to come up, so that's cool. And I'll see you guys in the next one. I've been cleaning. I know you can't really see, but I've been like cleaning. I found some stuff, some old posters. Like I have this Hunter X. We're getting off topic. I have this Hunter X Hunter poster. I should put that up. Didn't know I had it. It was just like lying in the closet somewhere. So yeah. Anyways, take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one. Educated Colin Snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be impeccable.